Well, good morning. Thank you for your time today. We're always grateful to be able to connect with you all. My name is Bruce Anthony, and I'm one of the trainers with CERVIS Technologies. Before we get started, I wanted to point out that I have several colleagues on the call today who will be able to answer your questions via the chat function. So please feel free to ask away throughout the webinar. They will answer your questions directly, and they'll also let me know of any questions that they think will be helpful for the entire group. I do also want to note that if they don't have time to answer your questions immediately, or if you have to leave before you receive a response, our customer support team will reach out to you after the webinar. So the plan for today is to cover an overview of the Signin Console, including newly added features like the Signin Questionnaire and QR Code Signin. We're also going to take a look at how you can utilize QR codes in other capacities, like event invites or flyers. So to get a baseline, we're going to start with the Signin Console as it normally operates, and some of the additional or recent features that affect that operation. And then after that, we're going to dive into the QR code process, enabling that and utilizing that, how your volunteers engage with those, and then, of course, other ways or other capacities in which you can use QR codes. So there's two main ways to open the Signin Console. One is via logging in on the admin side of your system. And then under Opportunity Management at the bottom, you'll see Signin Console/kiosk. So this is the kind of the main way that you would open the Signin Console. I do want to note that you can receive a direct link to your Signin kiosk. So if you have a device that is a kiosk only and you want to set it up to be that, you can, from our customer support team, get a direct link to your Signin Console. This is something that obviously you could bookmark on that device, and then whenever you turn on the device, you don't have to log into your admin account, you just go directly to that bookmark. Again, that's something that needs to be collected from our customer support team directly, and they'll provide you some warnings about not passing out that link to any of your volunteers because it functions essentially as a direct Signin Console. But to do that, you can always contact our support team using the Need Help button at the bottom of the page when you're logged into your admin account. You could type in a question through here, but whatever you type in, you can always click on Contact Us at the bottom to engage our customer support team. All right, but otherwise, to open the Signin Console, click on Signin Console or Kiosk under Opportunity Management. And when you do that, you're presented with a couple different options. You could choose to filter your kiosk by one of your interest categories if you only want a specific subset of events to be displayed when this kiosk is utilized. This is particularly useful if you have location-based events and location-based interest categories. If you have like multiple warehouses that volunteers could be signing in at, you could make it so that this kiosk only shows shifts from this particular location. You don't have to select anything here. You could leave it as show all available. That is the default. Below that, you can select when adding volunteers via walk-in registration, whether you want to use your full volunteer profile or what we call quick reg. So this just determines if someone is making an account on site, how much information they'll be giving to you at that time. So by default, this is using the full profile, but you can set that to quick reg. And you can, of course, configure your quick reg profile in the system configuration. Now, this setting will only appear if you allow walk-in registration in the first place. So if you don't allow volunteers to walk-in register, like bring a friend or a family member to an event, or just show up kind of unannounced, you will not see this option when you're opening the Signin Console. Now, below that, there's two buttons. There's a sign-in mode and admin mode. Admin mode should generally only be used if you yourself are signing people in. You can see everyone who's currently signed in and when they signed in, what they signed in for. You can sign people out or cancel sign-ins through here. And of course, you can look any person up and sign them in. But importantly, you are still logged in as an administrator. There's still a timer associated with this. And even more importantly, you can still go back to the main dashboard and you have access to your whole database. So you really do not want to select admin mode if you're going to allow volunteers to use this on their own. Instead, you'll want to use sign-in mode. So when you click on sign-in mode, you can see that that logged me out. I'm no longer logged into the admin side of the system, which also means there is no longer a timer associated with this. As long as the device is on, this will stay logged in to the Signin Console. So any volunteer can look up their name through here. Now, if they already have an account, they'll see their name. Depending on whether or not you allow walk-in registration, you'll see an option here to add a new volunteer if someone doesn't see their name. But all they need to do at this point is click on their name if they do have an account. And this is one of the new features that was added recently, and that's the Signin Questionnaire. So if you want, you can have the Signin Console ask volunteers a question daily or multiple questions daily. So these are presented when someone first signs in for that day. They won't be presented later when they're signing out, but if they come in again tomorrow, they'll be presented with these same questions as well. So in our case, we have a couple questions related specifically to COVID. So volunteers can answer yes or no, whether they're symptomatic or if they've recently traveled outside the US. And we actually require that volunteers answer no to these questions in order for them to sign in. If someone selects yes on either one of these things, it will present them with a failure message saying, make sure you selected the right answer. But if this is correct, you need to see one of our staff. Your answers don't align with our policy. And I'll show you that language here in a minute, and that also can be modified. So volunteers do have to answer these correctly, although that's not something that you have to do when you set up questions like this. They could just be more like survey questions if you're just gathering additional information from volunteers. These questions and the volunteers' responses are stored on the volunteer's profile in their notes section. So you can go and review these historically and download that information. It is stored on the volunteer's profile. Now below that, you'll see we also have our terms and conditions being presented. This is also a relatively new feature to have this as a part of the sign-in process. If you select here, you could see that, or if you see here, I have mine displayed, which means that I currently do not have a copy of these terms on file. If a volunteer does have a copy of your terms on file, they won't be presented with the terms and conditions because they've already signed them. But if you've updated your terms and the volunteer hasn't since updated their profile or re-signed those terms, or if they never signed the terms, like if you made an account for them initially, then they'd be presented with those when they sign in next. So they just check the box here and then follow the signatures depending on what you have enabled for your terms and conditions. Kind of the same process as people would normally do when they're signing in. So below that, we also have a verification using phone number. This is normal. We've seen this previously, but this can be enabled or disabled if you choose to. Now, if I answer this incorrectly, like I mentioned earlier, I said, yes, I am symptomatic. Then if we go down here and try to sign in, we're going to be presented with an error. And again, the language within here is something that you can modify, but this is the default language here. Just asking people that they double check they answered this correctly. Otherwise, they need to see a staff member for assistance because they cannot sign in. But if they do answer these questions correctly, when they click on submit, it presents them with the options to sign in for a shift or sign out if they've already been signed in. So if this is a volunteer who is signed up for something today, they'll see what they are registered for today in the Signin Console. They do not see anything from the past or in the future. They'll only see things that are relevant today. So events that are occurring today or projects that are long-term that they're already registered for. Now, if you allow walk-in registration and someone is not already registered for something, they'll immediately see what all registration options are available for walk-in. But if someone is signed up for like a service project, but instead they want to sign in for some other shift happening today, which they hadn't registered for, they could choose to view walk-in registration opportunities, which would allow them to see, what all is available today. And again, they can sign in or out from here. So when someone signs in or out, it's going to just give them an OK message, that you've successfully signed in or out. That message disappears in a moment, but the next person could already be utilizing the Signin Console for their sign-in process. Now, as I mentioned, those questionnaire options or questions are only presented to volunteers once per day. So if we came back in here later to sign out of our shift, it's kind of the same process. I look up my name. You can see in this case, I don't have to sign the terms because I've already got a copy of those on file. And I don't have to answer those questions because I've already answered them today. If I were signing in again tomorrow, I would need to answer them again. So signing in and out is kind of the same process. If I click here to sign out, it'll record exactly how long I was there based on the time of sign in and sign out. Again, this message disappears in a moment, but the next person could already be signing in. So that's kind of the normal sign-in console process. There's one last thing that I want to mention about this, and we talked about this in our last webinar, actually, and that's impact tracking. If you do have impact tracking enabled for an event, then volunteers could also log impact when they are signing out. All right, but that's sort of kind of the normal sign-in console process. What we're going to dive into next is utilizing QR codes as a part of or the entire sign-in process. So I'm going to actually close the sign-in console, which I do by searching for the term exit or close, and then I'll see the button to close the sign-in console appear. That is hidden intentionally so that volunteers don't close your sign-in console, while you're still trying to utilize it. So for QR code sign-in, you'll actually need to enable this in your system configuration first. You'll find this option in the system configuration under System Management. There's a section for Sign-in Console Kiosk Options. So if you expand that section, this is also where you will find the option to allow walk-in registration. This is also where you'll find the options to enable those questions as a part of the sign-in process. So you can configure those questions through here, up to 3 different questions. That failure message is also in here. So if you want to modify that, you can. Whether or not your terms and conditions are displayed as a part of the sign-in console is also a setting in here. And then the phone number verification is below that. And then lastly, we have QR code sign-in. So if you'd like to use QR code sign-in, you'll need to turn that on. Once you've enabled this in the system configuration, don't forget to update the configuration. Now on every event that you create or update, you'll be able to enable QR code sign-in. So if we go to add a new opportunity, or if I go to update any existing opportunity, the setting to enable QR code sign-in is found in the main body of options. It's towards the bottom, though. If we scroll down, you can see there's an option for Allow Mobile Volunteer Sign-in, which is kind of another set of options for allowing volunteers to sign in using their own device. So there's quite a few options within here. Most of them have a radius attached to them. All of these ones are allowing volunteers to use their own phone to do essentially the whole sign-in process. So if you turn on mobile sign-in and you say, yes, within 0.1 miles, this is around the meeting location address. And what happens is when a volunteer registers, they get their confirmation message. In the confirmation message is a direct link for that person to sign in. When they click on that button, it'll check, are they within 1/10 of a mile of the location address? And is it the day of the event? If those 2 conditions are met, then that person would be allowed to sign in and out, just the same as if they were using a kiosk that you set up. And again, that could have questionnaires associated with it. It could have the terms and conditions associated with it. But it's kind of the same exact concept as the sign-in console. It's just geo-fenced within 1/10 of a mile of the location address. So that's true for all of these location options here. There is also any location or ignore location, which both of these would allow volunteers to sign in anywhere. But any location would actually record their GPS coordinates when they sign in and out. So it's sort of a safety feature. Whereas ignore location does exactly what the name implies. It only records the times. So below that, we'll see the QR code options. So again, all of these are associated with the volunteer using their own device as a part of the sign-in process. So there's 2 QR code sign-in options here. We have Yes QR Code and Yes QR Code Express. So the QR code option would do the same sort of thing as mobile sign-in. There's a direct link when volunteers receive their confirmation email. So let me just show you this as an example. So this would be an example of a confirmation email that a volunteer might receive. And you can see right here, there's this event sign-in option, and there's an option to open up the sign-in code. And when they open up that sign-in code, it's going to look like this on their device. So it'll tell them, who they are, obviously, what the event is that they're signing in for, and then they're presented with a sign in and sign out code. What this QR code does is it functions as kind of the first part of the sign-in process. It essentially looks up that volunteer and verifies that they are who they say they are. If you have a questionnaire turned on, they'll still need to answer those questions. If they haven't signed the terms and conditions, they'll still need to sign those terms and conditions. So those things could still take place. And then they'll also still have to select which shift they're signing in and out of. This just kind of foregoes the process of looking themselves up and verifying via their phone number. It's kind of a more secure way to do that. So that's what this QR code looks like. And again, they could open this up on their phone and scan that, or they could choose to print this out if they wanted to. You can see there's a print button at the bottom of the page. So if they don't want to use their phone, if instead they want to print out that code, they could choose to do so. So that's the QR code option. Now, something I want to note about this QR code option is that you can actually create name tags or badges for your volunteers that utilize that QR code. And the reason is that code doesn't change between events. It's not specific to the event. It instead is specific to the volunteer. So let me show you what those name tags look like here and how to develop those. And then we'll come back in here and talk about the Express QR code, which is kind of an alternate version. So if you want to print out name tag badges for your volunteers with like a QR code to scan when they arrive, that's done via the volunteer management section. If you go into search and manage the volunteer database, you could go to advanced search and search for a subset of volunteers or use any of the other tools to find a set of volunteers. I'm just going to go ahead and look up all my volunteers by leaving this blank. I can select everyone with the checkbox in the heading. And then at the bottom of the page, there's a list of additional options. So I can click on display additional options. And within here, we'll see QR code name tags. So again, you'll need to enable QR codes before you'll see this. But when you click on that button, it will take a few seconds to download this. It's a pretty large file because it downloads images and the volunteer's profile photos in addition to QR codes. But once you've opened that up, it's going to look something like this. Let me pull this across here. So you can see here for each person, it has their name, it has the organization name, which is in your system configuration, and then it has their profile photo and QR code. So these could effectively be badges that volunteers consistently use. Again, this QR code would sign the person in, and then they would have to answer a questionnaire if you had it. Otherwise, they just pick which shift they're signing in for. All right, let's talk about the other version of QR code sign-in. So if we go back to adding a new opportunity, let's go back down to allowing mobile volunteer sign-in. The last item in here is, yes, QR code express. So it's a very similar process from the volunteer's perspective. They're still going to get an email. That email is going to have a link for their sign-in codes. But when we open up that link, instead it's going to present two different codes, one for signing in and one for signing out. And these codes forego the entire sign-in process. So if a volunteer scans this sign-in code, it will immediately approve them and sign them in for that shift. It does not stop for any questionnaires or terms and conditions. It doesn't have them pick which shift. It just goes straight to signing them in. This is a very fast process. So a volunteer can be signed, and then it's almost immediately ready for another person to be signed in just by scanning their code. Same thing for signing out. You just scan the sign out code to do so. So that's the Express version. And again, I want to reiterate the difference between those. This one forgoes all of the rest of the sign-in process in terms of answering the questionnaire, signing terms and conditions, picking a shift. It just does it immediately. Whereas the other code would just forego, picking their name from the list and verifying who they are. They would still need to answer questions, still sign the terms and conditions if those were out of date. And then they would pick their shift from there as well. All right, so that is where you enable QR code sign-in on an event. And again, either of those two options kind of present a similar process to the volunteers, at least from the email and the code perspective. Now, to use QR codes with the Signin Console is sort of the next process. So you'll need to set up your device to enable QR code sign-in. Now, I say set up, but this is almost identical to opening the Signin Console normally. So let's take a look at how that would work. So normally, if you open the Signin Console, click on Signin Console or Kiosk. From there, you pick your settings. And once you've opened it up in sign-in mode, if you have QR codes enabled, you will now see an option at the bottom to open a QR code scanner using either your front-facing or your rear-facing camera on the device. So you can pick which camera to use on the device. If it's a laptop or a desktop, obviously there's only going to be not obviously, but generally there's only going to be one camera. So You'll just pick that camera from here. For something like a phone or a tablet, you can choose which camera you want to utilize. And when you open that up, that will display the camera. This is a demonstration console, so it just has this GIF playing here. But that'll have the camera open, and you can go ahead and just scan someone's QR code. So this is exactly how that works. If you have most people using QR codes, but somebody forgot theirs, you could close this and have them sign in normally, and then just reopen this when you're ready to go for more. So it's really very easy to open up a device to use QR code scanning. You don't necessarily need to install anything in particular. You don't have to have any specific options installed on the browser itself. There are some device requirements specifically as it relates to handheld kiosks like phones or tablets. So for example, for an Apple phone, it must be iPhone 6S or newer, running iOS 13 or higher. For a tablet, it must be iOS 13 or higher for Safari or iOS 14 for Chrome. Remember, there are no apps with Service. These are all just opened in browser. For an Android device, there's lots of variation in there, obviously, but generally anything Android 9 or higher should be good using Chrome. And if you're in doubt with any device that you already have, just try it out. You don't have to install anything to do this. You could set up a test event with a QR code and just try to open up that scanner and scan that. But in general, any newer devices, iPhone 6S is pretty old at this point. So anything newer than that, you should be fine. So that really is how you open up and utilize QR codes in terms of scanning them as a part of the sign-in process. It's a very straightforward process from your perspective. And this can be done in a handheld manner. Like you could have a phone that you are scanning QR codes as people arrive. You'd want to use sign-in mode in that case, obviously still, because that's where these options are housed. But you could be holding a phone and scanning people's QR codes as they arrive. Or you could have a device set up with, a webcam pointed down that they just put their QR code under, and scan that when they arrive. So there's different options in terms of how you utilize that, but it really is pretty straightforward, and you don't need any specific hardware to utilize this. All right, so that's QR codes, as they pertain to the sign-in process, but there's a few other capacities that QR codes can be used within Service. So I want to talk about those now. Any links that Service generates for you automatically now have an option to generate a QR code in addition to that. So for example, you might be creating a flyer for an upcoming event and you want to include a simple link for volunteers to register. So you can always use that shortened URL. If you go into view, search and manage your existing opportunities, you can just go in here to view the opportunity details. And then at the bottom, you'll see those links for the private registration code or the opportunity ID, the direct event link. Both of these will work well if the event is posted publicly. If it's more like a private event, then obviously you'd want to use this private registration code. But when you click on these links now, you'll also be presented with a QR code option. So next to copying that link, which of course you can just copy and paste that out, you can actually open up the QR code version of that. So you'll see those anywhere that links are generated in Service. So in here, we're seeing that just in viewing details, but I could also go in and actually go into update the event's information. So go into manage the event or update the event details. And if we scroll to the bottom, we'll see those same things appear here. So I can just click on the private registration code link. Same thing here. We've got the QR code. If I click on that, it opens up the QR code here and it just says right click to copy or save. And I can just copy that image out or save it to the desktop. So again, anywhere that Service generates QR codes or Service generates links, it now generates QR codes as well. So you can use those on things like flyers. Like in that example, that would be for a particular event. So it would send people to that specific event. But I could also do the same sort of thing for reservation codes. So with reservation codes, there's always been a link to share the code itself with your volunteers. And what that does is it shares a link to the event listing page that is pre-filtered by that reservation code, meaning I'm only seeing the events that are in that reservation. So that link still exists, of course, but now there's also a QR code with that. So again, same thing. You can copy that out or save it and send that to people or post that somewhere if you need to. One last example I want to share about that specifically is in the interest category inventory management section under attributes. Your interest categories can be used to create pre-filtered landing pages on your website. So you may have done that as a part of the web integration, but you could also do this as kind of a simple way to direct people to a certain set of events. So for example, if I want to send someone to all of my library events and have them only see those, on the left-hand side, we have these link icons here. And the far right-hand one is for a console mode. And same thing with any link in Service now. Not only can I copy it out, but I can also generate a QR code for that. So I could just get that QR code up, copy that out, save that somewhere, put that as a part of a flyer or anything like that. And what that will do is it will take volunteers to an event listing page that only displays events in my set of library interest categories. All right, so today we covered an overview of the sign-in kiosk as a whole. We looked at the new questionnaire, which you can add to that process in addition to the terms and conditions being verified when volunteers are signing in. We also talked about QR Code Signin, how volunteers use that process and how you can set up QR codes in other capacities as well. So how you can send out links to volunteers using QR codes themselves. So we're going to move into a Q&A time. Our team has been answering questions throughout the call, but I'll be taking questions for the larger group as they come in. So please feel free to keep asking and keep writing in your questions as we work through those. So one good question came in just about the sign-in process itself, and that is each volunteer required to sign themselves out? That's a great question. And the answer to that is no, not in all cases. So for events specifically, when you create an opportunity and you select one of the event types in here, you assign a default number of credit hours for that event. So Service assumes that the volunteers attend the event for its full duration and give them that default credit hours for that event. So if somebody signs in for an event, but they don't sign out, that's fine. They'll receive whatever the default is for that event. That's not always the case. If you choose to set the event as being worth 0 credit hours, then that would be the default. So if they didn't sign out, then they wouldn't receive, credit. They'd be getting 0 credit hours because they didn't sign out. Now, those things can always be retroactively corrected. So you could go in and fix that from the admin perspective if you wanted to. But in the case of, if you're setting the event to be worth 0 credit hours, meaning you need volunteers to both sign in and out, then of course you would need volunteers to sign out in that case. Same thing with service projects. Actually, that's sort of their default behavior is if a volunteer signs in for a service project, there's no default credit hours for that because service projects are long form opportunities. And so the volunteers do need to sign out for those shifts. That being said, you can set a system-wide default for service projects. So in the system configuration, under the Signin Console options, you'll see there's an option to enable Signin Console automatic sign out, and you can set that to a particular number of credit hours. So in general, no, it's not necessarily required that volunteers sign out, but there are certain cases where you would want to make that a requirement of sorts. Very good question. So another question came in about signing out, actually, and that's, is it possible for admin to sign everyone out as a group when the shift is done? The answer to that is yes. So you can do that through the Signin Console via the admin mode, although that might be a little bit more tedious because you'd be going through and clicking those one at a time. But you can also do that through the event itself, actually. So if we go into an event after it's taken place, go to search and manage existing opportunities. You can search for the event by name, or if you know which one it is, you can just go in and find that. If you go to view the registered volunteers, which is straight on this page, or you can go into manage first if you want. But from here, you can select everyone or everyone that you want to. I could go and deselect some people if they didn't sign in. But then I can go down here at the bottom and I can select to sign everyone out through here. So that would bulk sign all of these people out at the same time. It would give them the same time for their sign out. So very good question. And yeah, again, the answer is yes, you can do that through the event itself by doing a bulk sign out here, or You could use the admin version of the Signin Console to go through and kind of one at a time pick people off that list. All right, another question came in about allowing QR code sign in, and does that force people to use their phones to sign in? So in particular, as that pertains to mobile sign in as well. So let's go and talk through these options again. I want to mention something very specifically. With mobile sign in, you cannot select both to allow mobile sign in within a radius and QR code. It's one or the other. That's why they're contained within this one option here. If you choose QR code sign in, it does not force people to use their QR codes. It just means that it's an option. So as I showed with the Signin Console, you can turn off the scanner and just have someone write in their name normally, and then turn the scanner back on. It's really easy to do that. And I'll show that again here in a moment. So it doesn't force people to use the QR code. It just presents that as an option. And then with mobile sign in, which would not be using a QR code, if you do have this turned on to like within a half a mile, this can be used in conjunction with the standard Signin Console or instead of it. So if you're doing something totally remotely, there's no way you're getting a kiosk set up, then obviously you'd want people to be using their own phones to do this. But if you're doing something where you just have a large mass of people signing in at one time and you want to present as many options as possible, this is also good for that. Because some people could use their phones to sign in when they arrive as long as they're within the radius of the location address. Other people could still use the standard Signin Console. They do not conflict with one another. And in fact, they work hand in hand. If a volunteer signed in on their phone, they could then go and sign out on the standard device, once their shift is up. So very good question. No, they do not conflict with one another in terms of enabling mobile sign-in does not mean that volunteers have to use a phone to sign in. It just presents that as an option. So let me just show again, when we open the Signin Console in sign-in mode, to open the QR scanner, you just click on one of these camera buttons here. To close the QR scanner, click on this cancel, and then someone could sign in normally, and then you could go back to the QR code scanner. So it could go back and forth if you wanted to. That being said, if you do have a large number of people using QRs to scan in and only some people using, typing in their name, you might want to have a couple devices. That might be a good way to handle that. That way you could leave one open on the QR scanner and people could just quickly go through that line. Other people could use their names, on the standard Signin Console. But they can definitely go back and forth on the same device. It's not like a very large delay to do that. Just need to make sure that people are closing that or reopening it. And actually, I want to clarify one thing with if you have the QR code scanner open, you don't necessarily have to close this in order for someone to sign in with their name. They could just click on this and sign in with their name from there as well. That'll go over the QR scanner. So you don't necessarily need to close it and reopen it. You could just leave it open like this. Okay, so someone asked, can it be set so that someone checking in with a QR code is automatically logged in if they only have one event they're registered for? If you're using the standard QR code option, then the answer to that is no. They'll still have to pick that shift. If you're using Express, then they'll never have to pick that shift, regardless if they're signed up for a bunch of things, because it is specific to that shift. So again, the Express code would just allow people to sign in directly, kind of no stops. It just dings them in. The next person could go right after that. Yeah, and one more clarification. If you do choose to use QR code, that would forego using mobile sign-in based on location. So it's kind of one or the other. In this case, they are contained within the same field. You can't select both a location and a QR code option. Okay, so a question came in, what's the best way to produce a touch-free sign-in process? And that's using the QR Code Express. You can have a QR Code Express sent to volunteers when they register. And again, that would be both the sign-in code and the sign-out code. And then when they arrive, they can either have those printed out or they can use their phone. And then that would be scanned by the Signin Console when they're signing in and when they're signing out. And they do not need to touch the console to do that. They would scan that and it would basically just sign them in immediately and forego any other touches. They wouldn't need to input other information. It just checks them in for their shift. The next person could check in right after that. Signing out is the exact same process. There's just two different codes. One for sign in, one for sign out. So again, the best experience for a touchless experience for your volunteers, or the best option for that rather, is QR Code Express. Yeah, and just to clarify, when QR codes are sent to volunteers, there's a question about how do volunteers receive that data. That is sent in the confirmation and reminder emails. So when a volunteer registers for an event, they get a confirmation message right away. If you have the reminder email set up, they'll get that a certain number of days prior to the event. But both of those messages will contain the link to open up their QR codes. So you'll have, the kind of normal format of this email is an intro section, which is in your system configuration, cancellation options, and then sign-in options below that. And the sign-in option is where you'd either see mobile sign-in if you have that location-based sign-in turned on, or the QR code would show up right here. So again, that's sent automatically with the confirmation message as soon as they register. And then it's also sent again with the reminder email if you have that set up. And of course, you can manually push the confirmation message at any time, and that would send that to the volunteers as well. Okay, and just to reiterate, this usage of QR codes in this context for mobile sign-in requires that there is a kiosk set up that is scanning QR codes that the volunteers possess. So the QR code is sent to the volunteer in that confirmation email or in that reminder email, and then that QR code is scanned on a kiosk or device that you have set up at the location of the event. So if you're doing something remote where you don't have the option to set up a kiosk, you may be better off choosing to do mobile sign-in, especially if volunteers are registering beforehand, because then they'll be able to sign in when they arrive using the link sent in the confirmation email, and there's no kiosk required in that case. If you're doing something where you want volunteers to register day of, you could do the QR code for that event. So again, every event in the system has like a direct registration link. So if we look at any event here, go to View Opportunity Details, scroll to the bottom, there's a direct registration code link. And you could use this to have volunteers register for the event. And you could pull the QR code for that as well, and volunteers could scan that when they arrive. But essentially what they'd be doing at that point is just going through the normal registration process. This is not the same as the Signin Console. They'd be registering for the event. You need to make sure that the event would be open for registration at that time, meaning that they're registering beforehand. Yeah, so a question came up about creating QR codes that take volunteers directly to the registration page to make a profile, or to the page where they'd be able to see all events and opportunities. So I mentioned the interest category pages here. You can use these links to link to a particular set of events. If you wanted to link to all of your events, you could just use a normal QR code to do that. And actually, you can put any link into the search bar here to generate a QR code for that. So for example, if you want to send people to your event listing page, let me log out here and show you this. So the event listing page or the application page, we could use that as well. You could send people to your direct application page, just grab this link. And there's a number of places where you can get the direct application page link. One of them is through the console navigation, but there's also some better kind of like different shorter versions or ones that have hidden navigation bars. But once you've copied a link out, you can paste that in to the search bar here to have the system generate a QR code for that link. So if you did want to send people to a direct application page or to your event listing page, or even to where you have your event listing page embedded on your website, you could do that. Now, if it's embedded, it'll just go to the standalone version anyway, so that's questionable to do that. But you can certainly, paste the link to like your application page or the event listing page and have the system generate a QR code based on that. And again, just copy and paste that out or save the image. So again, where I did that is I just copied the link from wherever I wanted that to. Now, in my case, I navigated to the application page, but you could also we have an article about how to integrate service into your website, which contains all of the links that you might want to use. And you can just copy and paste a link into this search bar on the main dashboard, and then that'll pop up an option to generate a QR code. All right, very good questions. Feel free to keep those coming in here, and as they do, we'll address those. We'll continue to address those. If you have not heard an answer us back, I think you should have. I think we've gotten to everything so far, but if you do have to go here, just know that our customer support team will catch up with you afterwards. Otherwise, if you do have questions, continue to write those in. I'd be happy to take those. So I am going to keep the meeting open here for a little bit, just in case there are some more questions that come in. Otherwise, of course, whenever you have questions, your best resource is our customer support tool. So whenever you're logged in as an admin, click on Need Help. You can type in a topic through here. Let's say you want to learn more about time slot events. You can search by that term, see all the articles that have to do with that. We also have a lot of YouTube tutorials. But beyond that, you can always click on Contact Us. And this is how you submit a support request to our customer support team. Okay, another good question came in about checking in on volunteers that have not signed out. So if you want to review volunteers who have signed in or out, there's a couple different places to do that. So I want to show you a few different tools. If you go into search and manage your existing opportunities, you can go directly to a particular opportunity and go to register volunteers or groups. This menu will show any person who did already sign in or out. You'll see that straight away on this page. There's a column for sign in, and this shows you the date and time of sign in. And if that person did sign out, you would actually see that their calendar icon had changed to gold. So normally this is blue. So if that's changed, that means their hours have been adjusted. So you can see right away which volunteers have signed in and out, and those who only signed in, and those who didn't sign in or out. So there's kind of a visual representation of that information here. You'll also see on the right-hand side, if I mouse over these registration notes, I can see the date and time of sign in and sign out. So if someone has done both, you'll see both of those recorded in those notes. So this is one place to simply view that information. But if you're looking to get a list of all those volunteers who did not sign out, you may be better off running a report for that information. There's a few ways that you can do that, but specifically in the report management section under volunteer management, you could use the custom participation report and select to include things like date and time of sign in, as well as things like the notes on the event itself. And you could have registration times in there if you wanted to. You can also, in this case, include the answers to the Signin Console questions if you want that information to be in there as well. So then you can just run this for a particular date range. If you only want it to be for a specific opportunity, you could run a search for that event and then use that previous search as the query here. Now, where you run this search is actually through the opportunity management menu. So go into search and manage. You could search for it by name or use the advanced search options or other items like that. But once you run a search, you can go back into the report management side and just like to use that previous search. So one last thing I wanted to mention about reviewing sign in and sign out is there is a quick option to mark no-shows based on people who did not sign in. So if we go back into search and manage opportunities, I could select multiple events at once. And then at the bottom of the page, you can use this drop-down menu to say you want to mark no-shows for volunteers and groups. Now, when you select that, it changes the text of this button here. If you click on that text, it opens up a dialog that shows you only people that did not sign in. So if anyone signed in, they will not be in this list. I'm only seeing people that did not sign in for their shifts that have already taken place. So I'm not going to see any shifts from today forward, but I will see things happening, last week or any time in the past. And I can select all those people from here, mark them as a no-show, sign them in if I want to, remove them, send them an email. So there's different actions you can take within here. If I do mark them as a no-show, it takes them out of the event so they don't get credit, and also adds a no-show note to their profile, which you can search by. So you can find volunteers based on how many no-shows they've had. All right. It looks like we've gotten through all of the questions that have come in here. So once again, I want to thank you for your time today. It's a pleasure to see you in the chat. I know I've met with a lot of you directly, so thank you for joining. We as a team are grateful for the work that you do throughout all the different organizations and communities that you're serving and impacting. And partnering with you is one of the most satisfying aspects of our work. If you have any questions from today or really anything regarding utilizing your system, please feel free to reach out to our customer support using that Need Help button I showed you earlier. Or, of course, you can email support@servicetech.com.